We're live. Today, we have Ben Violot, who is a French Canadian, finally migrating back over the ocean to Canada. And I met Ben about 5 or 6 years ago. Ben was super interested in nutrition and joined us for a few programs at Real Meal Revolution, not to lose weight, but to advance his own knowledge because he had been evolving over quite a while. And Ben is an insane trail runner. He used to send me pictures of him running through the Alps. And one of the things that always blew my mind was always wearing slip-slops. In South Africa, we call them slip-slops. They're called flip-flops, thongs in Australia. And then I caught on Facebook the other day that this madman ran a 24-hour race. So ran nonstop for 24 hours and clocked up 180 kilometers. And the first thing I thought was, surely not in slip-slops. And anyway, I looked at his post on Facebook, and you wouldn't believe it, but there was a photograph of his feet, and this is what they look like. I cannot believe this. So anyway, here's Ben. Ben Violot, welcome. We're here to chat about why on earth you run in slip-slops or sandals.
Hey, Jonno. It's nice to talk to you with you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, man. Good to have you. So let's get into it. What on earth with the feet, man?
It's a bit of a long story, but it kind of goes essentially back to the genesis of me running and being an overweight runner. Because when I started, I was overweight. And so for overweight runners, you have a lot of technology that's offered in terms of shoes. You know, you get like all sorts of support and all sorts of things. And I was trying to figure things out, and it just wasn't working. To put it simple, I tried like a million different models, always getting like pain and issues and all sorts of stuff. And over time, I kind of fell into all this documentation about minimal running. And it was like, hey, the rest isn't working. Might as well try this. And it was immediately better. I was like, oh, okay, this is a good way to go. So I did most of my running life in minimal footwear, but most of them were just shoes. They look like shoes, except they're really flexible.
How was it better? What is the meat behind minimal running? Yeah.
Well, the idea is to get as close as possible to what a natural running gait would be. So typically, you know, if you think of your ancestors like running barefoot across the savannah, as close as you can get to that, because that's the way the body was meant to run. So it's, you know, ideally you try to respect it as much as possible. And it's actually quite interesting if you are overweight or just overall heavy, because you learn how to create your own shock absorption with your body. Obviously there's a learning curve. It's not a magic tool. You just, you know, suddenly take your shoes off and bam, you know, ultra marathon, you know, and like, it doesn't work that way. But you do learn to be a lot more efficient in your movement and no longer require a lot of padding under your foot. So I did that for years.
Do you mind if we just stay on that for a second?
Yeah, sure.
What does that mean for people who do run with shoes with a lot of shock absorption?
Well, there's one of the better ways to explain it is that your brain essentially manages how heavy you land. Okay, you have little to no control over this unless you consciously think about it. It's kind of like breathing. So if you're on a very soft surface, and when I say soft, essentially when you're running in big running shoes, as far as your brain knows, the ground is the inside of your shoe. Your brain can't figure out that the ground is under the shoe. So your brain is running on soft ground. Yes, well, that's the contact.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, sure.
And so if you're on a soft surface, you're on something that's relatively unstable. Think of, you know, walking on like thick mud. It's never really stable. You kind of wobble around. Well, to some extent, shoes kind of do the same thing. And so when you're doing that, your brain tries to compensate. Says, okay, this surface is soft and unstable. I'm actually going to land harder, because I want to create resistance in this material in order to stabilize myself.
Wow.
So if you find the perfect mix, because everybody's built different, right? We have different weights, we have different gaits, but if you find the perfect mix of, you know, that bit of cushioning that's going to, like, it's stiff enough, you know, for your weight, then you'll probably be just fine. Like, there's a little range where it can kind of work. But for most people, it actually doesn't. And that's why most runners get injured like at least once a year minimum. And most of them get injured more than once.
So would you get a plantar fasciitis from your foot kind of overcompensating all the time?
That's possible. Yeah, it could be plantar fasciitis. It could be shin splints. It could be so knee issues and back problems and so on and so on. Like, there's a whole host of problems. But it's a lot of them are related to the shoes, not necessarily, but sometimes it's not the running shoe itself, it's the day-to-day shoe that causes the damage. But then when you put extra strain, you know.
Yeah.
So here the idea is just that you try to work on the body. Essentially, you don't ask the shoe to do the body's job.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
But obviously then you have to train the body to do it, because it just, you know, since you usually haven't done it most of your life, your body is untrained and your foot is untrained and your leg is untrained. So you need to build up to it.
So does that mean that you kind of, so how does that affect your stride? Because most people who run, like, they run duck-footed and land on like a heavy heel from like is it a Hoka, that trail shoe that's basically like
the very thick ones?
Pillar? Yeah. What happens to the duck-footedness then? Because that one, you can't do that.
Well, you tend, I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, but you tend to have what you would call a flat foot strike. So essentially, it's that you really land midfoot. So essentially, it'll be the front of the foot, it'll be the first contact point, but you're actually only really loading on the 3 points of contact of the foot. So the front two, like essentially the limbs at the front and the heel in the back. And so that's when you really actually load the foot. And so you're landing relatively flat-footed. If you're slowing down, you'll be heel striking, because that's the best way to slow down, which is also applying more force into the ground in order to essentially lose force. You're getting rid of it. You're applying force into the ground and you're no longer reusing it to propel yourself. And if you're accelerating, you're going to be leaning forward. So it's going to be a front foot strike, because you're trying to put all the energy in propulsion. So there's different strides. It doesn't matter what you're wearing.
Yeah. Okay. So, and if you're running sort of just like on the flats, cruising along, you kind of running, so slap bang on trying to use the whole
pretty
foot,
much
basically.
Flat. Yeah. Pretty much the whole foot just landing flat. As I said, like the first actual contact point is the front of the foot, but it would be a mistake to call it a forefoot strike, because you're really only loading on the whole foot. So it'd be a midfoot strike. Is
a toe strike the same as a forefoot strike?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So now we can go back to the story.
Yeah. But I figured that worked better for me. It took a while to adapt. And, you know, over time, that's just how I ran. But I did experiment a lot. I mean, I used some more cushion shoes. I used some more minimal shoes. You know, I used a bit of everything. I was just trying to figure things out, because there's not really a guidebook for this. Like there's the barefoot ayatollahs, you know, it's like everything barefoot all the way. Or there's the cushion ayatollahs, which is like, if there's no cushion, you will actually die. You know, and so there's no real middle ground. And plus, I mean, I'm not the lightest person in the world. So also the things I'm wearing are often not. So to give a perspective, I weigh over 200 pounds, over 90 kilos.
Well, like right now, today.
Yeah.
But you're quite lean. Are you really tall?
I'm 1.85 meters. That's like 6 foot. So I'm not like super tall, but I am a bit stocky, just like naturally built like that. And so I've always been relatively heavy. So when you do get a gear, it's often, you know, especially higher end gear, they're thinking of athletes that are going to be like in the 75 to maybe top 80 kilo range, maybe 85, but like 95, no way. Like that equipment's just not meant for that kind of weight. And it's also not necessarily meant for the kind of distances I do. So but that came later. But so the idea is that, you know, I played around for years and years and years, and eventually just kind of found sandals, just because I'd heard of them, and I was like, what the hell? I'll give that a try. That looks funny. And it turns out it was the best experience ever. I was like, wow, this is incredible. I get adequate foot protection. My feet are pretty wide, so I'd had no like space issues, and it just kind of worked. So yeah, that's typically what they would look like.
And so is this like your special pair, or is this just the kind of, I mean, is there a brand in particular, or are there loads of different brands of this sandal? Because this is the only pair, not just like the only brand, literally the only pair I've ever seen. So they can't be like a listed company, you know.
So I don't think there's any listed companies to do this, but there is actually a whole bunch of brands that do so minimal style sandals like this.
Yeah.
So this is the what they call the huarache sandal, which actually just means sandal in Spanish, by the way. But it's often used as a, like, you know, a name for them. So they have the strap in the middle of the toe, but you'll also see different styles. And you have like American brands that do it. These ones are from a brand called Panta Sandals, who I work with.
Yeah.
And they're a company based out of the Netherlands. And they've been making my sandals for over a year or so, maybe. I can't remember.
And so do you need to get these? I've got a few questions about them just in general. So
Yeah, go
the
ahead.
first thing that strikes me is that the places of discomfort that
Yeah.
would like immediately frustrate me is that this would pull against my webbing,
Yeah.
and that this would really feel tight against my Achilles. What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. What does it feel like?
So, first of all, so in between the toes, if you're not used to wearing anything between your toes, your skin is essentially brand new, right? So it's never
Yeah.
really had any contact with it. So that's going to take a little bit of time to adjust to, but it's really no big deal. It's like you might have to put a little bit of anti-rub cream on it, like those anti-chafing creams you get for running. Might
Yeah.
put a little bit of that on, essentially lube up
Yeah.
for the, maybe first couple weeks, and eventually your skin just kind of strengthens itself.
Okay.
So it won't really be vulnerable. I used to have to put cream on all the time, and now I just go and do races without them. So I'm fine now, but I wear sandals
Tough as
all the
nails.
time. Yeah.
So do you wear them?
The
Do you
skin
wear them
adapts.
when you're not running as well?
Yeah, I have essentially where the sandal is on my foot there, I have a tan line.
Okay.
I kid
Got
you
it.
not.
And that knot doesn't bother you?
So that's actually it's relatively flat, so it doesn't really get in the way. And what you're seeing there, that top strap is a technical strap we use for trail running.
Okay.
On the road versions, I actually don't even have that, and I don't even use it at all now. So
Wow.
it's
Okay.
an extra piece of comfort. If you really want to hold the sandal into place, I would recommend it for essentially like a very rainy day where your foot might move around a bit more.
Okay.
But you don't necessarily need it.
So now you use these sandals to, is it kind of like a meditation that it reminds you of where you've come from? Because does that make sense?
Yeah, I kind of see what you mean. I mean, there is the idea that you're using like the most simple piece of apparatus.
Yeah.
And also there is a real sense of connection. Like when I'm running through like pebbles, like I can feel them kind of bouncing off my foot and stuff. And like, it doesn't hurt. It's just a pebble, I'm not slamming into rocks or anything, but so you kind of feel that extra connection. You can also you'll run right through a river and you don't care. It's just a river. I mean, it's like, it's not a deep river, whatever. And you see other people in their shoes kind of like tiptoeing through it. And you're like, dude, it's water.
Squidging in their socks for like half an hour afterwards as well.
Yeah, whereas your foot will dry out. I mean, there's like there are some like this kind of connection side to things is kind of cool. But mostly I really stuck to it because it's really only all that worked for me. It was the only way that I could get sufficient protection for the technical. So I really came to it for trail running. In road running, it didn't really matter. I could pretty much work with anything, but in trail running was the only way I could get like really enough protection underfoot, while still having like a very wide platform. And the shoes just didn't cut it. Like I have shoe options for road running, but in trail running, nothing works for me.
So that interests me with the trail running thing, because I don't really find I need like protection when I'm trail running as much as I need like a firm grip. Like I find that I need a really hard shoe. So I agree with you, by the way, on the sensation thing. I hate a soft shoe. I like to feel everything. But when I'm trail running, like, I mean, when I run in the forest near my house, it's like slippery as anything. And so I need grip, and then I need something that can withstand like landing on awkward shapes. So because I imagine with this, it's quite thin. So I imagine your foot kind of like bends around whatever you hit.
Well, it's actually not as thin as you think. It looks thin because my foot's just huge, but they're actually relatively thick. There's a good, you're probably working with a good centimeter plus of really dense foam. So it's like they're very hard at first. It take a while to like, work in and get more flexible. So you actually get that's what I call by protection, is that if you were to step, let's say, on a rock smaller than the surface of your foot, and it would push on the one side, you're going to feel the push, but you won't necessarily feel that sharp edge. So as long as your foot is flexible enough, it'll kind of adapt to it and it'll kind of flex around it. but you won't get that sharp poke where you're gonna go like, ow.
Yeah, I got it.
So that's kind of the idea.
Cool. So take us back to why running is such a big thing. You were telling us before we came online, or telling me at least, that it's kind of 8 years before your run, and running is quite a significant part of a bigger transformation.
Running was actually it was kind of my motor. So when I was about 25, I was so very much overweight. I was at 120 kilos approximately. And actually, I don't know how high I went because I stopped weighing myself after a certain point because it's just fucking humiliating. You know, you look at yourself in the mirror and you go like, I'm disgusting. And then you get on the scale and the scale says, well, yeah, you are. And so you feel terrible. And you say, well, I'm not going to have this conversation anymore. And you just stop checking. But I essentially was around 120 at my highest. And I was smoking about a pack a day. And I had been for at least 10 years at that point. And I drank quite a bit. And obviously we're not talking about kombucha here. We're talking about alcohol.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really fully fledged into alcoholism yet, but let's just put it this way. If alcohol wasn't available when I wanted it, I would get pretty angry. So it shows that there is that kind of dependency.
Yeah.
And so at 25, I was realizing that, well, I was only about 10 years away from when my father had his first heart attack. And he passed away at age 50 from his second, with roughly the same situation, smoking, drinking, overweight. So I was like, okay, I'm 10 years out and kind of feeling like not feeling too great. And yet at 18, I'd been all right. Like, you know, I was still pretty skinny, pretty athletic, but it had really just gone seriously downhill. And I was like, do I have 10 years? Like, you know, you start to ask yourself those questions. And so I like to hike a lot, and I was thinking, hey, you know, I want to feel fitter when I go hiking, so let's try running. Because it's one thing I could do at home. I lived in Paris, you know, there's not much hiking in Paris, so I went to the gym, got on the mat, started running, and it's like at first I could only do 10 minutes. I was like, this is weird because I can only run 10 minutes here. Yet when I go hiking, I seem to be able to hike like 3 days in a row and no problem. And so it's by starting to try to problem solve the running. It's like, why can I not run? Like, that I got, you know, started to think about the whole shoe thing. And then you're like, oh my God, I discovered this magical thing. It's like, you know, less shoes, suddenly I feel so much more athletic, and it kind of like drives you.
Yeah.
So, and it really became kind of like that motor. It became a social thing too, because I would go and run with people after a while. It took a couple of years to get to that, but still, you know, like once I built the confidence, it's like, oh, I can go run with people and not get dropped. Started running with groups that helped my social life, you know, like the whole thing just really stems from one day I went into a gym. I tried to run on a mat. I had a target goal of 10 minutes. I didn't make it. It pissed me off, and I had to figure out why. And from that point on, I was trying to problem solve it. And as I tried to problem solve it, I just got hooked. And because it felt good too. Like every single time you solve it with a little problem, you're like, oh, I feel so good, you know, and you're happy.
Yeah. And every time you run, I think like, even if you have like a bad run, it's difficult to feel like properly depressed afterwards. You can be irritated, like, you know, bad time or whatever. But generally, like, exercise is the tonic.
Yeah, that's it.
And so, what happened after that? So just tell me about like the alcohol. So did you just decide like, I hereby quit drinking and smoking and everything, and will now be a health icon, or did you decide to run first and then realize they couldn't live together?
I think the food kind of happened around the same time, but a little bit later. It just came a little bit later. But it was like, it's the same mindset. You just, you know, you're dealing with one issue at a time. But I was essentially, you know, contemplating the fact that I was overweight, and I was like, okay, what can I do food wise? And somebody in my sort of circle of friends had said, you know, well, we did this kind of Atkins style thing. So essentially, it's really easy. You just don't eat any carbs. That's that was the only guideline I had, by the way. It's just don't eat carbs. I was like, okay, I guess I can do that. And so I was like, so what has carbs? Oh, shit, all that stuff. And I was like, that's a lot of stuff. I was like, okay, but like, then
the whole of France, basically.
Yeah.
You can't eat in France anymore.
But it was okay because it was like, you can have meats and vegetables. It was like, well, I like meats and vegetables. That's fine with me. And so I gave it a go, and I got that, you know, that super encouraging, like, when you first start keto, because it turned out I did full on keto without even knowing it. like I said, my only guideline was just don't eat carbs. I'd lost 8 kilos in 2 weeks because, you know, you're losing all that water weight and you're like, wow, this is great. I feel so much better, you know, except then you realize that your waistline hasn't really moved, but, but that, you know, you figure out later.
Yeah. Well, that's not always the case. I mean,
yeah, of course.
You know, some people lose like everything. They just all of a sudden feel slimmer. But anyway, that's okay. So that's incredible. And then, after that, you progressed into trying to help people. So what I don't know is what happened with your career, because you're now a coach, and we'll talk more about that just now. But what were you doing, and then how did you change or transition across?
So I was working in advertising at the time. I'd been working for Philip Morris, Nike, and a couple of food brands as well. So I mean, so essentially all the places I had problems with. So it also became, looking at my own lifestyle, it became complicated to go and sell those things afterwards. Not that I was doing the actual sales, but you know, you're like, I'm working on this and yet I disagree with what's being done. And so eventually it kind of created a shift, and some people were seeing me just get healthier and started asking questions. And without knowing it, you're now becoming a mentor. Like you're just answering questions, just saying like, oh, well, I did this and that. Oh, you should try this store. They have these kind of shoes. Or maybe you should try this, and maybe you should, you know. And after a while, you're like, this feels like a bit of a coaching mentor / relationship. And you're like, huh, and this is fun. I'm enjoying this. Like I'm actually spending more time thinking about this in my day than I am spending thinking about my work. Wow. So, and plus, you know, you're feeling this shift in your work, and you're kind of like, okay, well, I'm not really interested in this anymore. And on the other hand, there's this kind of side hobby that seems to have appeared that I'm really enjoying. And so it's like, okay, how can I make this a career? It took a while to really figure out. I mean, you know, when we were working together, like on the training part, it was really just, I was still at the very beginning of it. I didn't even really know. I was like, am I doing like sports coaching, health coaching? Like, what am I doing? But it took a while to shape. But that's really how it came about. It's just helping people around you. You know, it's just answering questions, and eventually you're like, hey, maybe I could make a living out of this, because it seems like, you know, it's interesting.
The coaching thing, I think a lot of people don't understand coaching the way, well, I didn't understand it either. You know, I thought like if you're so you do get sports coaches who literally give you a plan and tell you to follow it. But in general, when you want to coach, you want someone to help you execute. And I think that's totally different. You know, like I could, if I didn't know anything about nutrition and all I had was like the Banting food lists, I could still coach. And I don't know if that's been your experience as well. Like most people who want to make a change don't really have an issue with the theory. It's actually an issue with like
the execution.
What's in the way of them executing on the theory? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. So there's essentially, when you look at people that are trying to work on their health, there's really two groups. There's those that want a guidebook, and some of these people want somebody to read the guidebook to them, essentially, and explain it and answer a question. So they do want that technical knowledge. And then there's those that are, like you said, really just want to work on the execution. So they've understood how it worked. They might have the odd question, but that's, you know, just kind of beside the point, because they could go elsewhere to get the answer. But it's really about working on the motivation. And what is complicated is that the word coach tends to be associated with these two types of people. So actually the best sport coaches are the ones that help you on execution, by the way. They might give you a training plan, but they're really just helping you stay accountable. And I think those are the best sport coaches. So even in the sports coaching world, it applies as well. So totally. I think, you know, even though, when it comes to health coaching, I think you need a bit of both. You need a little bit of technical know-how, or at least some general understanding. So you have to be able to help, you know, guide people along, but they do have to make their own decisions. So like you said, like that's why I talk about mentoring as well. Mentoring is a different thing. I think that you need to, in some fields, so typically in running, I find that you need a little bit of mentoring. Especially when it comes to things like ultra distance running, where it's all about problem solving, and somebody that's already solved a problem might be able to avoid you spending 5 years figuring it out. So, you know, like that can be interesting. It's like, oh, you're getting that kind of problem. Well, that's actually very simple. This is the issue. And then like, here are the solutions I've found or that I know of. That's mentoring. It's not coaching, right?
Yeah. Got it.
But then, sticking to you and saying like, hey, have you gotten that thing to solve that problem yet?
Yeah.
Like, where are you at on that? That's the coaching part. And that's important too.
Yeah, vital. I often wish I had someone like who would stand next to my bed and blow a whistle at like, like 5 in the morning. When someone's standing there watching you, even at the gym, like I find someone's watching me, like you can just push 10 times harder when there's someone breathing over your shoulder. It would be so great to have someone like that all the way. But anyway, I want to talk about nutrition. So you said that you were doing keto. One of the things I think a lot of people battle with is keto and sports performance. So where are you at with that, and how do carbs fit in, or fats, or ketones, or exogenous ketones?
Yeah. Well, at first it was really all about the weight loss. So it didn't really matter what it gave in terms of performance. And I'm a big fan of Dr. Phil Maffetone, who's just an absolute legend when it comes to sports performance and sports nutrition as well, even though it's not his core field initially. But actually, I think he was like a family practice doctor or something like that. But he became a specialist. And so this was mostly low intensity training. So the good thing is, if you're on a low carb diet, especially when you're beginning and you're not quite keto adapted, and so you're still struggling with intensity, following a low intensity training protocol is just absolutely perfect. Because you're never really going into that high zone, and you don't essentially get big like blood sugar drops, from high intensity training. So it was actually relatively easy at first. So those first couple years, it was really just working, like, getting the fitness up and, losing weight through the diet. On the other hand, when I started to get into trail running, as those who practice it would already know, has big variations in rhythm. So typically you're cruising along at a pretty easy pace, then comes a hill, and even though you're slowing down, the intensity itself goes way up because now you're fighting gravity. And so in trail running, I suddenly kind of hit a limit. It was like it became really hard to do like a big push up a mountain, because we're not talking hills here. I was going in the Alps, and the Alps are pretty steep. So you can have like this 1,500 meter climb, which is a lot,
in
over
one
like,
sitting.
Yeah, in one block. That was actually how I first figured out that I had a problem. But it's just, I was on this race that had this. Yeah, it's crazy. No, it's absolutely crazy. And you can think of it, that might not even be the top of the mountain, because some of them over there are way bigger than that. And even if you're starting from
that's one climb
hill,
in a
one climb,
portion of a race, or is that like a whole race?
No, in the portion of a race. That's the longest I think I've had, maybe like 1,500. Actually, no, I have done worse. I've done 1,008. But it's just that these climbs are so long, and it doesn't matter if they're steep or not steep, right? That's not so much the point. It's just so much elevation where you're always pushing against gravity for like hours and hours and hours, and you essentially run out of glycogen. So you're now running on empty when it comes to glycogen. But the thing is that the intensity of the effort, just because of the gradient, means that you're actually still trying to tap into that. And I found that in those situations, well, it took me a while to figure out, but eventually understood that, okay, I needed to trickle in some carbs there to really like kind of help me along. And it took, again, a long time to figure out what kind of carbs and, like how to work through it. Because at first, you just like, what happens if I have like a tiny sip of sports drink? Well, first of all, it's disgusting, but and then it turns out it doesn't really work. Then, try like slower carbs. Oh, okay, I can't digest them because, like it just takes so much time. And so eventually it was more like, okay, so very simple carbs in very small quantities. It's come down to the point where I just essentially take like applesauce with me, and that's like my sports gel.
Like with your roast
just
pork,
applesauce. Yeah, like applesauce.
And you just take the stuff out the jar, or do you?
Well, no, I don't have the jar. I buy them in little pouches, because they make them in little pouches for babies. So I can literally buy this in any supermarket. You can just get a little applesauce pouch, and that's like, if ever you're really like on these really, really long efforts, and you can feel it, like your body kind of gives you those signals, like, hey, we're running out of juice here. well, you can essentially bring some in. I've even occasionally had the odd, like, the odd little like chewy candy kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
Those are my worst out of everything out there.
yeah.
Like the chewy gums, they
Oh
make
no,
my
not
mouth
gum,
feel like,
just like what
yeah.
it called, like jelly babies and stuff like that, like
That's
just
what I
soft
mean. Yeah,
candy, right? Yeah.
the soft jelly sweets. Sorry, not
Hmm.
chewing gum, but like
Yeah, yeah,
we call them gummy bears,
yeah,
like
stuff
gummy
like that.
bears and jelly
But
babies.
those have worked for me because you can get like very small quantities, and essentially
Yeah.
it's a very easy to understand quantity. It's like I think it's 5 grams per candy or something like that. You get 5 grams of sugar, but it's very simple sugar, and it digests immediately. So in the middle of an effort, it kind of makes sense. But you
Yeah.
don't want to pop like 5 in a row, because then you're going to get a huge spike, right? The applesauce is usually a bit better, but it's also harder to digest. So it depends what you're
Yes.
doing. Like I've done it in situations where it's like I'm kind of doing like a end of race sprint. And
Yes.
sprint is relative. Like when you've done 100 kilometers, like sprinting is actually quite slow. But
It's a big effort.
but it feels like you're going fast, but you're not. and in that case, you're no longer able to digest, because you're taking up so much resource in the movement that you can't. The applesauce just doesn't work, because it does require, even though it's easy to digest, it requires a bit of effort. So that's when like these very simple sugars in small quantities are actually interesting, because they do give that little something, because they go right into your bloodstream. It's pretty much like you might as well have a needle and just shoot it into your arm. Like it's the same thing. There's like zero digestive effort.
And do you go, are you in ketosis all the time? Or so would you like start a race in ketosis and then finish kind of waiting to go back in?
Actually, I don't think I ever really drop out because of ketosis, because I really don't eat that much carbs at all during any race. And if I do, it might just be like a little while, and then essentially I'll just go back into ketosis. But the thing is, the effort is such that any blood that enters your bloodstream is just absorbed immediately by your muscles. There's really, I mean, I have tested my blood sugars. I've never actually done ketone tests during an effort, because it's just too complicated. But I have, on the other hand, tried with a blood sugar monitor, and it's the most boring game ever. I just watch this line stay completely flat and barely even move. And the only thing that actually does happen is that sometimes it drops a bit low.
Is that a
And that's
patch
about it.
or an implant?
Yeah, those the little readers that you get. The Super Sapiens things is the one I tried, because they were giving them out for trial. So I gave it a go, and I was in the Alps, and so I said, hey, let's go do stuff. And I was like taking screenshots of the app, thinking like, okay, I'll keep these for future reference. And then I looked at all the screenshots and I was like, I can't tell which one is which, because I didn't write it down, because I didn't know which one was a night's sleep and which one was me going up the mountain nearby. It was like, okay, this is pointless, because you still get really stable blood sugars.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I just always hear about people saying if you cut out carbs, your blood sugar is going to go totally out of whack. And it's almost like the opposite. It's like when you add in
No,
carbs,
it's super
out of whack.
stable. It's crazy.
Wow. Okay. And so can we talk about coaching, like the kind of clients that you coach now, and what your plan is? Because at the time of shooting, you're basically on your way out of France and back to Canada.
Yeah, that's it. I'm currently still in France, but I'm moving to Vancouver. So the type of, actually, I've worked with a pretty wide range of clients, and I have an interest, I've focused my interest on really two categories. People that are essentially in situations of chronic illness, like heavy, obesity, diabetes. I mean, diabetes has a personal focus for me, because I'm pretty well versed in it, partly because my wife is type 1 diabetic. So there is that interest in diabetes in general and understanding the mechanism behind it. Although type 1 and type 2 are very different things. Do understand a little bit better how type 2 works from witnessing type 1 every day, and obviously helping people with type 1, because technically my first client was my wife. So, and it was like, how to figure that out, how do you become an athlete while having type 1 diabetes? How do you learn to master type 1 diabetes? Because it can happen very late in life, and you can be like, hey, I just got diagnosed. What does this do for my life? Like, do I need to live on sugar now? Well, maybe you don't. And on the other end of the spectrum, I've been working with people that are athletes already and that are trying to improve that. And so there it's kind of a mix of a bit of sports coaching, a bit of nutritional coaching, so on one end, you have people that are trying to get into it and people that are trying to fine tune. So I kind of like either the let's get started, the big broad strokes, and on the other hand, also like this kind of like minutia to detail. It's like, okay, so let's try like taking the carbs down by 10 grams a day and see what happens. And, or let's do like these really weird protocols. It's like, okay, let's try a, like anti-inflammation protocol for like 2 weeks and see like how the numbers check out. And I like that too. It's fun. But I think it's also good to have the intuitive side.
Totally. Well, and where can people find you for coaching? I'll type it into the comments now, and then you can.
Yeah, actually, the easiest way is to just send out an email or reach out to me on Instagram. So that's b.violot, Violot, at gmail.com, or just Instagram or Facebook, Ben Violot. So,
okay,
pretty easy to find.
Put out into the comments everywhere. Boom, 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 boom.
Cool.
Ben, you legend. I can't believe that you did that thing in flip-flops. I'm buying what you're selling, by the way. I think it's fascinating. I'm like tempted to, in my mind, all the excuses are showing up. No, it's cold, it's wet, it's winter, it's Cape Town. But you have a compelling argument for minimalist running.
Hey, you have no excuse. I ran in sandals in snow back in March. Okay.
Yeah, that's badass, man.
You have no excuse on the weather. I was wearing socks and let's, but still you can. I'm not saying it's the best thing to do, but you can.
Yeah, but you can't wear socks and slip-flops in Cape Town. That'll be the, you got to maintain.
That'll be the end of you.
Social standing. Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, Ben, it was great chatting to you. Thanks so much for giving up your time. Likewise. And safe travels back home and all the best. So if you want to reach out to Ben, chat about coaching, Go ahead, Violot at gmail.com. Otherwise, check out the comments for more links. Thanks so much, Ben. Keep it real, man.
Thanks, Jonno. Take care.